Right. Well, good. We'll go ahead and get started. We'll just take a moment of silence and prayer before we begin this session. Heavenly Father, we give gratitude to you for the many gifts of this life, especially for this opportunity to love you and serve you in this capacity through our work, our ministries. We ask for special outpouring of the Holy Spirit and grace upon this time together, that we may deepen our understanding of Catholic social teaching and how it may be integrated into our work in our lives. We ask all this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. So we're really fortunate today to have Laurance Alvarado from Catholic University. He also is an entrepreneur himself and has a lot of business experience, strategy experience. I'll give a brief introduction to him, and then he'll offer, a typical format, 15, 20 minutes of discussing Catholic social teaching, which he teaches a class at CUA on Catholic social teaching and in the context of business and entrepreneurship. So he's going to give us a micro dose of that in this session, with some stories and anecdotes from his own experience. It should be fascinating. We might take some lessons for how to integrate that into our organizations and companies. But he's a professor at the Busch School of Business at CUA, with a focus on strategy and business and entrepreneurship and Catholic social teaching. He spent time at KPMG leading projects in government and private sector. He's, as I mentioned, he's also been an entrepreneur and investor over the years. It's just always one of these guys like us, probably, that just has a lot of projects going on at any given time. He's also been involved in founding and running the DC Accelerator, which is in Washington, DC, and it's a accelerator program that has some similarity to what we were doing as well. So he's familiar with this type of work at the intersection of business and spiritual and personal development. So Laurance, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and share some of your insights with the OSV Innovation Challenge finalists. We're really grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very, very much. And congrats, guys, on not only being a finalist, but on just doing some great work. I spent a lot of time looking at the projects and going through the website, which is very well done, by the way. There are a ton of things that are relevant. And as John was talking about, as we kind of move from one project to the next or have multiple plates in the air, as my wife would call it, it's like we can't hold a job, it seems. Like we're constantly finding a need. You're constantly finding a gap in service or product or something like that, and you just feel compelled. It's this sickness that we have in order to kind of create that. And I think that most of us, if we're entrepreneurially inclined or just even want to get things better, you're always straddling the fence between, hey, I can do that, and two, just not being critical about what's already there. So you're trying to really be positive about certain types of things, mortifying your opinions on a lot of things, and it's just this wonderful integration on a whole host of areas. But what's fascinating about this, I think that when John first came to talk to me, about this, and he asked for a couple of, we had multiple sessions prior to all this. John was, just extremely gracious. And he said, hey, Laurance, what do you think? If you had to charge for something, let's talk about that. What would it be? And I said, John, it's very simple. I've been a consultant. I've been a partner at a big 4 firm. I've worked internationally. I charge $5,000 for 3 questions. John goes like, what? He goes, isn't that expensive? And I go, hell yeah, that is, man. I said, you got 1 question left. So anyway, so it's about entrepreneurialism, it's about looking and forwarding the needs. But, again, I'm just extraordinarily happy. So this past weekend, I got to share this with you guys. You'll notice in fact, John was even commenting on this. It's like, I got this sign up here that my son put, "Work hard, daddy," right? You know, thank you for the motivation from my son. Turnabout's fair play, I suppose, because I'm always I don't scream. I'm always projecting for him to focus and to ignore distractions and these types of things. So anyway, I was just delighted when there was a certain amount of initiative that was beyond airsoft guns and running around with his buddies and riding his bike. He exercised the initiative to go ahead and start a lemonade stand here in the neighborhoods. It was his first time. It was extraordinarily cute. And I am convinced that there is no greater entrepreneurial activity at your first thing. You know, we don't throw papers anymore. Nobody has a paper route to, say, which was kind of one of my first jobs. But, setting up a lemonade stand. And of course, we're going to ignore all of the cost of goods sold, right? Because you're just routing through all of the cabinets and finding all the stuff that doesn't belong to you. But that's okay. We'll just pretend I'm the government. And so how we went ahead and he took all of his stuff, took all of everything. And I'm like, okay, so let's talk about this. How are you going to price all of this? How are you going to do this? And then I noticed that he had this really strange little bottle that looked really similar to like poison. And I'm like, okay, so how's this all kind of work? And he says, oh, see, Dad, it's very, very simple. What I do is that I offer the first glass for 25 cents. And I said, okay. And that's great, but what about the second glass? Oh, that's 25 bucks because that's actually the antidote. And I'm like, aha, now there's a kid who really understands pricing and need and the ability to actually craft things. But in all seriousness, he did reap $9. He was extremely happy. We actually went through the whole cost of goods sold element. And it was a really good opportunity for us to talk about not only meeting the need, creating a service, being, product positioning and all these other types of things. It was an opportunity for us to talk about, and he's heard me, he's been to my class. We actually started talking about human dignity. We started talking about, what is fair pricing and what is a fair service and what are these things? How does that actually relate to, our work? And, in other words, how can he actually earn money now that he has to go buy his own supplies and things that we are all very, very familiar with, right? But let's kind of walk through a little bit before we get too much into kind of the Q&A. I think it's important for us to kind of baseline our what do we actually mean by Catholic social teaching? What is it that we mean by pillars and all these other types of things? We have pillars and principles and tenets and everything else. Let's at least get the nomenclature harmonized for what we're going to talk about. And let's look at Catholic social teaching in the context of starting with Rerum Novarum. Of course, it goes back to Christ. And by the way, happy feast of St. Peter and Paul today. Wonderful solemnity. But, as we kind of look out, the Duc et Altum, set out in the deep, we see world events that are overlaid. The encyclicals are not just this response to nothing. They're a response to world events. They're a response to how people need to be attenuated so they're able to have a certain amount of understanding in the context of social economic conditions and the context of their salvation. And, as we look at, again, kind of this very simple schematic here, starting with Rerum Novarum, we see the overlay of the Industrial Revolution in very, very similar to kind of what we're seeing right now, in the sense that people are being used as that proverbial cog in a machinery. There's this concentration of wealth, concentration of innovation, but because you don't necessarily have the digital age that is trying to create all of these things that we see now, you have to employ people. You have to employ armies of folks in order to actually get the goods, whether you're the train or the steel or the oil or the railroads or the shipping or whatever, textile mills. All of these things, of course, have to be done in concert with people. Therefore, you have that whole element of danger, being able to protect the family, because now you didn't have all these protections, not only from the 9 to 5 type of hourly days, but certainly the fair wage, these just wages. And, you know, this was extremely important where, you know, Pope Leo the 13th, who, you know, goodness, the Catholic University of America was, you know, we have a statue of Pope Leo the 13th in one of the main halls because it was chartered by him. And there's a whole element of being able to really understand that the person will never, ever, ever be the means, but the ends. And again, if you overlay that with the Industrial Revolution and kind of trace that through all of these different elements, that holds true. You know, when we look at World War I and World War II, we look at the, you know, 40 years later after Rerum Novarum, we're able to look at, okay, so what is work now against this backdrop, against these different societal norms that are coming up, expansionist principles, expansionist, you know, Russia and Germany and, you know, and all of these different things that are consolidating. We have to go ahead and again look at what is the individual's role, what is that role relative to work, how does that actually make sense again in the context of wealth development. We again see communism coming into vogue, a forced vogue as it were, and we certainly see again, you know, looking at, you know, Pope John the 23rd being able to actually step back and say, all right, guys, you know, now let's look at all of this, because this is that proverbial, you know, Heidi and Alvin Toffler, first, second, and third world country type of classification. The way that one makes war is very similar to the way that one makes economies. So you kind of look at that harmonization, you look at that relationship. And then again, you look at the against expansionist principles of communism, you look at the advent of humanism, and all of a sudden you start really seeing these giant gaps in the way that war is done, and of course the way that economy is done, and therefore the way that people are treated, the opportunities that they have, or more importantly, the opportunities that they don't have. Whether it's done by the politics, whether it is done by, you know, being taken over forcefully, or whether they simply don't have the appropriate political and economic and social constructs in order to hold a country together or a society together. Fast forward 100 years, Centesimus Annus, Pope John Paul II. Really what we have here is this, you know, this obituary for Marxism. You know, because you're kind of looking and surveying over this last 100 years, you know, as we're probably all very, very versed, you know, how he had his personal experiences. But, you know, he said that there is something very, very unique and vitally important about work. And it's the same thing that the other pontiffs had discussed. And, you know, there's a lot of systems out there. And there's a spectrum, quite frankly. But out of this spectrum, you know, the free market is probably the most efficient. But you know what? There are some evils that go with this. And I think we're all kind of familiar with this. But if we look at, again, you know, what are we looking at in the baseline? Some common themes really start to emerge here. You know, we start looking at the ability to have property, private property. We look at this just wage. We look at meaning towards work. We look at the ability to have an integrated society where we can't just have, you know, anarchy, and we can't just have complete government centralized control. There is something that must exist to amplify the human dignity. And if we think about human dignity in the context of work, it's perhaps helpful to think about it in the context of having our own talents, and to appropriately have our talents amplified by the appropriate allocation of these talents to work. Now, there are all sorts of conditions that I'm sure you guys are all trying to come up with. Again, one of my favorite quotes is from Baron von Moltke, who said that no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. And we in business and we in entrepreneurial ventures can think about it in the context of like, no pitch deck survives contact with the investor, and it certainly doesn't survive any type of contact with the customer. We're constantly discussing. I love how that being able to be extremely flexible has been codified into, quote, agile methodology. I just thought it was like, crap, we just got to get this done. But that doesn't really have a nice ring to it, right? So we call it agile. It's really difficult to be, crap, we got to get this done to be certified, right? So we've got to think about it, with certain methods to the madness of iteration and collaboration and everything else. But it's a very instructive commentary, and it's a very instructive methodology that allows us to be able to look, to take, to accept, to test, to roll out. These types of things are really very, very interesting. But if we stop and think about the conditions that must exist for us to even get to, say, an agile methodology, we got to think about it in, so let's kind of pull it back to Chintisi Musanos. I'm certainly not going to say that Chintisi Musanos is the, is responsible for, IEEE certifications or agile methodology. But I will say that for us to be able to put the appropriate products and services together, it's more than just shooting a gap of need. It's more than just looking to see what exists or what doesn't exist. It's more than just saying I can do it better, faster, cheaper. I mean, that's important. But it is important in the context that we look at our work and we look at our way that we contribute to society. We look at the way that our work, again, amplifies the talents that people have. That work in its own way creates a personality. It creates the personality that we have. We all know, look, we have probably all been, this is probably none of our first, what we're doing now, it's probably not our first job, right? And if it is, it's going to completely change. But, on our path, we've gone through different types of organizations. We've had different types of supervisors and bosses and colleagues and everything else. We develop a personality. We develop a personality towards work. Now, there's a certain point, however, where we can say, hey, my personality is best suited for, X, whatever, for a Big Four firm, or for a large defense integrator, or for a small company. But perhaps it's better to think about it in the context of, where is my vocation relative to work? How am I actually going to create value in this particular organization? And does that organization allow me to go ahead and have the amplification of my talents? That way I can go ahead and apply it. So again, capitalism, free market, these types of things provide kind of the structures, provides the bounds for us to go ahead and have this wonderful opportunity to kind of do what we're doing, for us to come up with a new idea, for us to think about, to raise capital, for us to be able to hire people, for us to fail and not be punished. I think one of the most wonderful, and very Catholic, by the way, laws that we have within the United States are actually bankruptcy laws. And if we think about it, the ability to not go to jail when we have to declare bankruptcy, as you are want to do in other countries, it's a very interesting concept. So we have a society, we have a structure, we have certainly means, we certainly have interests that align and promote and can create the incentives to invest in startups, or to invest in entrepreneurial ventures, and to invest in these types of things. You don't want to earn your 1% or whatever it is these days in your passbook savings account, then look at other mechanisms. And what we're doing are ways to go ahead and create wealth. It's ways to go ahead and create opportunity. It's ways to create the framework, the structure, the organization where people can apply their talents. So two evils that Pope John Paul mentioned, specifically in Chintisi Musanos, about capitalism, about the free market, are really the same types of things that, again, the other pontiffs talked about. Putting things above people, and then making sure that the person is the means and not the end. So we've got to have those elements in our mind. So I want to be able to now kind of overlay what we call the pillars At least we at the Busch School at Catholic University, you know, we talk about these 4 pillars that contribute to the human dignity. And, you know, what we're trying to do, and everybody has definitions, and there's 1,000 of them, but these are the ones that we've kind of settled on and at least been able to kind of harmonize. But so I don't want to say that this is inviolate, but I do want to say that, you know, from us, when we think about the contribution to the common good, you know, we reference and cite Gaudium et Spes, and, you know, what we're talking about is the sum total of social conditions which allow people or groups as individuals to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. So the sum total of social conditions that must be there. So again, all of those conditions that I had just talked about, you know, the banking system provides, you know, particular conditions, the policy of a bankruptcy, you know, law, you know, the judiciary, you know, all of these types of things provide a wonderful opportunity for us to have a social condition that creates something that is beneficial for all. That, of course, then thinks, you know, if we think about it in the context of solidarity, where, you know, we again go to John Paul II, and we're looking at solicitudo res socialis. You know, we're talking, and I love this, you know, it's not a feeling of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortunes of so many people, both near and far. On the contrary, it is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. To commit oneself to the common good. That is to say that the good of all is the responsibility of each individual, because we are all really responsible for all. So here we are, common good, sum total of social conditions, boom, solidarity, we're all in this together, guys. So what I'm doing, I need to make sure that my work then contributes to the elevation of somebody, so they're able to go ahead and drive it to the common good. Now, my favorite, personally, and I think probably everybody here, because we're all not working for a giant Leviathan organization, we're kind of doing our thing, we're paving our path, we're doing all these wonderful things. We can't do this without subsidiarity, which is this wonderful opportunity to have human freedom at the crux of work and the crux of where this is actually done. The rubber meets the road. I mean, there's a million ways to define it. I love just simply saying, you know, subsidiarity, you know, should be done at the lowest level possible and no higher. And you know, there's ways to think about it. With my students, I always talk about if you have a fire, you know, in your house, you're not calling FEMA, right? you're calling the fire department. You know, you're trying to get things down. You know, you're trying to, you know, if you need, if you're, you know, just take it over. Continue to use that that analogy. You know, I want to go sailing. I'm not calling the Coast Guard. You know, I'm going to the boat guy, or whatever the case may be. So, you know, there are ways to, you know, not micromanage. You know, that could be something that we're doing at a very, very granular level. You know, it could also mean that, you know, as we're trying to create something of community, as we're trying to create something of value and worth, you know, where are we doing it? Where are we getting our feedback? How are we doing the implementation? So, you know, that wonderful lowest level, you know, possible, and no higher. And again, this kind of goes back into the human good, which really talks about the dignity of the person, justice and peace. Pope Benedict talked about it in, you know, in Caritatis in Veritate. You know, he talked about it by espousing one thing. So, like, you know, you say you're doing this, but on the other hand, you're not doing this. So you have this, you know, terrible thing. Like, for example, we say we're all for human life, but our actions don't back that up. We say we're all for a just wage. Yeah, but we're kind of not doing that. You know, we say we're all trying to create something that's service, but we're not. So, I mean, again, it's very, very specific, and it can be extremely profound and quite humbling, because when we look at Catholic social teaching and we look at, you know, our roles as entrepreneurs, our role as effectively being the maverick R&D arm of the world in many respects, right? We have to take this Catholic social teaching element. First of all, we need to understand it. But number two, we need to look at things that can create tension. Things that, you know, we have to say, all right, you know, I've got to develop a product or a service. I have to have it appeal to somebody. I've got to get traction. I've got to get scale. I've got to get revenue. I've got to do it profitably. It's responsible to do all of these types of things. It's completely irresponsible to create a business and then to run it into the ground. It's irresponsible to do something and then have it not make revenue. So it's more responsible. And again, an opportunity for us to amplify our talent and our value, to be able to have these things that we're trying to do be worthwhile, contribute to value, contribute to virtue, contribute to the opportunity to develop an individual and corporate personality. You know, again, we have all of this because we're not just doing it for the heck of it. Obviously, it may have started that way. We probably sat around over a napkin and drew it out. And we said, you know, what if, you know, how do we go ahead and do this? Or you have a whiteboard, or you have a piece of paper, and you just kind of do things. But it's really, how do you structure the organization? And here we are, you know, right? We have these conflicts. How do we do product development? How do we get traction? How do we get scale? How do we do these things without sacrificing these elements that we had just talked about? So, you know, just a couple of things, and then let's chat about this, because, you know, number one, what I would like for all of us to think about, and you probably do, so bear with me as I probably tell you what you already know, but let's think about all of the metrics that we put together. Let's think about all of these metrics as outcomes as opposed to goals. It can be very, very difficult to do, because what do your investors want to see? Well, they want to see traction. Well, how is traction defined? Well, traction is defined by the amount of people that come in, and not just people, but perhaps paying customers. Well, what does that equate to? Revenue. Oh, our revenue curve is doing this. Is that a goal, or is that an outcome? So what I would encourage, again, everybody, is to, yeah, you got to have revenue, but make that an outcome of your behavior. Make that an outcome of your processes. Make that an outcome of all of these different types of things. Total addressable market, all of the, you know, customer acquisition costs, all of these other types of things. Yeah, I mean, of course they're important. I mean, you know, just like your gas gauge is important, but your gas gauge is not your goal, right? Getting to where you're going is your goal. That's what you're trying to do. So think about your metrics. Think about the ways that you do the measuring of certain types of things as an output or outcome of great behavior. In addition, think about internally and externally. And it's important to have that personality. And, you know, marketers will call it your brand or your positioning or these types of things. I'm talking about your personality. We all have it. And look at it relative to your virtues. What are you trying to actually promote? What are you trying to actually, you know, not necessarily differentiate in the context of a product or a service, but are you able to go ahead and contribute to these four pillars over here, the human good, common good, solidarity, subsidiarity? Are you able to do that? And if not, why not? And if you want to do it, well, then how are you going to do it? And again, looking at the outcomes that are going to be looked, you know, perhaps a measure, are they furthering all of these different pillars that we had just talked about? So I've taken up enough kind of intro time and general background. It's a good thing I didn't have 3 slides, right? I would have talked for another 20 minutes. So let's go ahead and open this up. I'm not entirely sure how to do that.
Yeah, I'm happy to moderate. So people have been putting questions in the chat, and we can draw from there and go to it. But, you know, transitioning to those questions as a follow-up to what you said, Laurance, and thank you. This has been a great, like, these visuals are super helpful, just to see a lot of these concepts and ideas in history condensed together in a digestible way. So this has been great. You know, you mentioned a few things at the end about how to think about revenue. And I love that analogy of a gas gauge as opposed to like the end destination, right? And either in terms of revenue or, you know, you also mentioned thinking about personality as opposed to like necessarily like your brand, but could you maybe like give us a quick case or an example of those concepts in life? You know, maybe you've seen in an organization or company of how someone thought about the virtues relative to CST or their virtues relative to their personality as an organization or company?
Yeah, I mean, and I will shamelessly talk about what we're doing
Sure.
with the latest startup we have right now. And so effectively what we are doing with our latest startup is we are, for lack of a better word, we're like the Airbnb of industrial real estate. It's completely sexy, right? No, so I mean, what we're doing is that, think about parking lots and warehouses and all of these other types of things, anything that's not a building, not commercial office space and not residential. And what we're doing is fractionalizing and creating short term. So we had to really step back and we had to say, okay, what is it that we're really trying to do here? Is it, and it's not just saying, I want to get stuff, I want to get stuff in a warehouse. Okay, yeah, I get it. That's the process. But what is it that we're really trying to do? And I tell you, we picked at this thing for first of all, to be able to just even have that discussion, to be able to actually say, to separate the transactional, use cases that everybody, develops, right? If everybody, has done their business process engineering and their IDEF analysis, and you put all of your user roles and all those other types of things, and you have this giant spaghetti chart of all of the inputs and outputs and everything else, which you should do, by the way. You absolutely should do that, but don't confuse that with what is it that you're actually trying to do. Kind of what's the 3 or 4 things that you're trying to or three to 4 word thing that you're trying to do. That is perhaps hiding in plain sight. It may not be what you're actually the service. It may be related. And what we're trying to do, what we came up with, is that we're actually creating economies. We're trying to create economy, and we're trying to create economy that allows people to have to avoid the capital costs of perhaps investing in say, I don't want to go buy a warehouse, or I don't want to go buy a parking lot. I don't want to go to these types of things because what I'm doing is risky. However, I will fractionalize it. I will be able to go ahead and do it on a short-term basis. I just don't know how. So boom, we're solving that problem. And so all of a sudden, our personality, the way that we view, the lens by which we're actually looking at opportunities, comes within creating an economy. And then we literally put human good, we literally put those pillars up, and we said, okay, how are we contributing to these types of things? And are we not doing it appropriately? And internally, are we looking at subsidiarity? Are we doing it the right way? And then externally, from an enterprise perspective, are we giving the people the right tools, the right workflow, the right ability to actually do something that is meaningful? That there's, without getting too much into kind of product design and everything else, because I've seen some of your sites and work, and it's fantastic. But I like to think about, having things that are meaningful, useful, and beautiful. And your work, your websites, your product, your services, they really do need to have those conditions, the meaningful, useful, and beautiful. Because, you may not, use your PowerPoint as means for an apostolate, but if you have a really well thought out and clear case, you're able to articulate it in a broader perspective. You'll capture more than just imagination. You may capture souls. You never know. So that's what I mean by having a personality, and by identifying that's something bigger. Some people will call it a vision, all these types of things. I want to break it down into, this is what we're doing, this is how we're contributing it, and this is how we overlay it against the pillars.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So thinking of your business strategy and different aspects, where that's like, I notice how you've kind of substituted some terminology too, instead of like marketing or branding, like personality. You've kind of humanized some of the commercial speak, if you will,
right.
Which I think helps. You're starting from a place of like Catholic social teaching and principles of human dignity, as opposed to like, well, this is just the jargon that's in the corporate world, and going with that. I mean, you kind of can end up in a very similar place, but your lens of approaching it is That's neat. That's awesome.
Right.
And just a follow-up question on, you said meaningful, useful, and beautiful. Is that an intentional relationship to the transcendentals of truth, beauty, goodness, or is that?
It is.
All right. No,
It absolutely is. You've lifted the cover of my. But yes, no, it absolutely is, because let me tell you, I can't come up with a very good acronym. BUM doesn't work, because that would be, that would be terrible. MUB is even worse. So I just say it, right? But you've got a meaningful, useful, and beautiful, and it absolutely goes to that, John. You saw right through it.
Great. Well, and I see Martin Ford had that in the chat too. So we're many of us, some of us saw through it together. I'm gonna start pulling through.
I'm that transparent. Yeah, I know.
It's great. No, it's great. It shouldn't be too difficult to see, hopefully. Okay, so I'm gonna drop some questions from the chat from some of the.
Yeah, let me see. Do I get to see that? Should I stop sharing my screen, or do you want me to? Or keep this up?
You can, whatever you'd like to do. Yeah, that works. You can see all these pretty faces, and
there you go.
Faces too.
Nice.
Okay, so here we go. There's a question here on what happens. So this is from Luis. What happens in the case of systematized social corruption? CST also speaks of structures of sin, where sin has institutionalized into society. Should we as Catholics try to transform these social structures however we can, or only focus on what's clearly up to us in a matter of faith and like our labor duties and responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, institutionalized anything is always going to be attacked at, again, let's apply subsidiarity to this, and I think the way that we have to look at it is that you have to apply it at the lowest level possible. And in many respects, it's with people, it's with working, because you have to, friendship becomes so important and so fundamental in our dealings. I mean, every one of us has to have some way of, reaching out and touching people and creating relationships. Institutional corruption is, you're looking at somebody who is caught within this whirlwind or caught within this gravitational pull, and their habits have not necessarily been developed relative to their virtue in that. We as Catholics have an opportunity and an obligation, quite frankly, to develop friendships with people that may, they may be in this horrible institution. So it is through our outreach and through exposing, and then hopefully kind of working from the inside out in many respects, that we're able to do this. Because sometimes working at that top, it's so, what are we going to do? We can't go carpet bomb it. That just doesn't make any sense. We can, however, deal on a friendship by friendship basis. Jesus, right? It's kind of what he wants to do. Be the friendship, and that can transform so much. That's a big question, and we could go in for hours on that one, but that would be my simple answer.
Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the beautiful insights I've had in the lives of a lot of the saints too, the ones especially that build things, is that they just start with little things in front of them. You look at the life of Don Bosco, and he's like, well, there are these street kids that don't have spiritual formation or schooling, and let me just help a couple of them, and then that turns into an oratory, and then within a few decades it's becoming one of the largest congregations in the church, the Salesians. But it doesn't start out that way. It's like, here's a need in front of me, how do I address it?
That to that point, I think if we're, this kind of goes back to the whole element that we had just talked about. There's a calling. We have a calling to do work. We have a calling, whether we're doing it in the secular world, whether we're doing it in the the religious world, whatever the point is that our work we can use that as a means of sanctification. We can use this as an opportunity for us to good work appeals to so many people, and that can be a real magnet for the apostolate, for evangelization, for creating friendship, or helping out somebody that may be struggling, and they don't want to be helped. Right? There's that whole pride thing that we have. There's that whole competition thing. There's a whole element of, I don't need your help. I don't need your help. Well, guess what? Maybe not now, maybe later, but to avail yourself to even be able to do that. I mean, goodness, what a wonderful way to serve. What a wonderful way to say, look, I'm here. And then that's that seed. To your point, John, you don't have to start huge. Whoop, I lost you.
Yes, still on mute. Okay, this is a question from Jay, and he's referencing, in this current, this very unique situation, difficult situation that we're in. One aspect of which is, some people have been categorized as essential and non-essential personnel in labor context. But I think it opens up a broader issue. He's saying, he's asking the question of how do you value the work? How do you value one's worth in the modern workplace? In this context where some are essential and non-essential, but it's a bigger issue too, right? Like, how do you just generally, what are some principles and tactics of really valuing the dignity of the people that you're working with, and their worth, and making sure that you're staying focused on that, as opposed to utility or seeing people as a means to get done what you want to get done or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think it depends on the work. It really does, because if one is more in a kind of a what we would call the this is not the right term, but if you're kind of more in the thinking world, in the service world, you're a consultant or something like this, you're able to go ahead and say, hey, go do some research, or whatever, go do something, go apply yourself. So you're not necessarily trying to create, you're not trying to equate, this is all I have. But guess what? What if you're, what if you're not that? What if you're a salesperson, or what if you're a beautician, or whether if, or whatever the case is. And I think a lot of it goes back to, what perspective, what lens are you taking? Are you taking that perspective as a business owner? Are you taking it from a policy perspective? Are you taking it from, a finance perspective? So you have all of these different points of view. And each one of them is obviously going to have to, run through several filters in order to kind of come up with the same answer. But I think for us, by honing in on the appropriate allocation of talent to the job is a really good starting point. Now, what that means, however, and this can be a very difficult conversation. What that means is that what if your talents don't translate? What if you need to go get new talents? What if you need to go get new skills? There are wonderful ways to go ahead and do that. And I think what we've got to do, I've done it with many folks that have come to me through the DC Accelerator. It's like, I no longer have this opportunity. Well, what is it that you want to do? Are you enhancing your skills? Are you applying your talents to something else? Are you doing these types of things? The answer was like, no. One of my really, really good friends, she is young, runs a hair salon, she's just one of those wonderful, immigrant entrepreneurs, comes over and is just not going to say no to anything. And we were talking the other day, and it's like, what I'm doing is I'm not just staying here. I'm not just cutting hair. I am looking at, and then she named like 4 or 5 other things that she's doing to broaden her opportunities to go ahead and reach out to folks. So it kind of goes back to, all right, dignity, right? You got your dignity, but don't wait for somebody else to give that dignity to you. You got to take it. You have to take the initiative to take account, to harmonize, do your own inventory, and then be able to go ahead and have the opportunities to go do other types of things. And our role is to encourage that. Our role is to facilitate it. It's to provide the training and the opportunities and those types of things.
Can you give maybe an examples of, from your experience where you've seen that done well, in a case where, someone either runs with it on their own, or like the conditions are set for that flourishing, in reverence of human dignity, maybe or one aspect of it?
I think a lot of it goes through the training and skill building. I really do. And I think it is just as applicable if you're a forklift driver or if you're a data analyst. And, I've seen it, I've certainly seen it in previous kind of economic turndowns. I saw this in the, in the mid 2000, 2007, 2008 and all that type of stuff. I saw a lot of people having to retool what they did and having to go learn different skills. And the ones that got left behind, so to speak, were the ones that just didn't take the initiative to do it. So, but let me put it this way. So you have to have, from an organizational perspective, the organization has to recognize that it's more than just a face filling a space, right? That face, there's the human behind that space, and that if there are elements that are overcome by events that we simply can't employ you, well, perhaps there are ways that we can invest in that person, or invest in creating a different skill set, or help that person be able to go ahead. You know, you may not materially or monetarily be able to do it, but you can certainly do it in the context of you know, promotion or you know, helping out or advice or those types of things. In the context of, you know, say, yeah, here, a great example, just on a very, very basic level. Somebody who has a commercial driver's license, you know, needs to go get you know, needs to go learn how to drive a forklift. You know, somebody that needs to drive a forklift goes from driving a 13K to a 15K to a 25K to a 35K and just continues to go up. So the conditions for us as an organization need to exist to recognize that just because you may be redundant or displaced or whatever, that it's like, boop, sucks to be you. Can't do that. We've got to be able to create and help the folks. On the other hand, we have to make sure that I guess the structures, societal structures, can be taken advantage of. And this is why this wonderful complement between some of the public policy that we have seen comes into play, where we have to understand how to go ahead and use the resources at our disposal in order to kind of create this. But it comes again from really understanding and not treating the person just as a space, you know, and a face in that space. Really important.
That's great. Thinking about the participants in this program, we're all pretty early stage in our ventures, and you know, so there's a lot of people, you know, in the process of raising funds, and you know, acquiring first customers or clients or stakeholders, whatever that looks like in the context.
Right.
Do you have some suggestions on for early on how to think about that? Because it's so easy to be like, I just got to get this deal done. I just got to get this customer, you know, and how to do that in a way that, you know, you're reverencing that person or loving them and not seeing them as not using them, right, intentionally or unintentionally in that process to just get to where your goal is. Yeah,
that's a really great point. And as a matter of fact, just even today, we're kind of in the similar stage. We're you know, whatever we can do. I mean, and that, I think that's kind of my perspective. That's almost the mentality. It's like whatever you can do. And I will advocate more for a high touch, early stage process, even if your particular process is one to be more automated, or, you know, to try to be more efficient. I think to be able to understand what the customer, client, or whatever, the user is thinking and how are they specifically using that, and having that touch point, you know, our touch point as founders to have this is extremely informative. You know, I kind of think about, you know, Brian Chesky and, you know, his partners as they did Airbnb, and you know, they're like banging on the doors, like, why did you use us? You know, how did you use this? And how did you use this? Did you like our site? Did you hate our site? You know, I mean, I think that stuff is extremely important, because again, you're not reducing it to a transaction. You're looking at them from a perspective of, okay, look, you know, you're really important to me, and your opinion really, really matters. And I'm going to take that, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to pull your human dignity right through our business processes and our coding processes, and our coders are going to take it and they're going to understand it. Perfect example today. Got a call from a new user in Nashville, Georgia. Now, I defy anybody to say I've been to Nashville, Georgia. I mean, there's no reason anybody goes to Nashville, Georgia. But we have somebody that is it's a client and, you know, user of our site. And again, because we're early stage, you know, the way this whole thing should work is like, you know, somebody has space, somebody needs space, you know, you stick it in the big process. Rube Goldberg does his business and, you know, pops out this thing. Well, we're you know, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to work. But I'm like calling people in Nashville, Georgia, and I'm calling the person who wants the space. And I'm like, okay, guys, don't forget to do this. Now, I really want your opinion. Well, today, the gal from Nashville, Georgia calls me up and says, I just want to let you know that we actually think your site is key to our economic development. I just about fell over, because that's precisely what we want to be able to do. That's exactly what we want to be able to do. But she did, you know, I could not have that conversation with her unless I'm tracking every single last stinking detail of what she's doing. Now, obviously, scale is not going to get us to that point. You know, you can't do that with all your customers, but boy, you certainly can do that with the first 50 or 100 or whatever the case is. And that, and to me, that is an essential way. The other thing that I'm just gonna, boom, you gotta do this. As you guys grow, do not outsource your hiring. Don't outsource your hiring. Hire your people. Your companies, and you probably all know this, right? I mean, but your company's personality, especially if you're the founder, that's you, and that's your personality. And people are going to be respectful of the personality that you create, but only if you're involved in it. And so, anyway, just a thought that popped in.
Yeah, that's interesting observation. I had something similar recently. I was like, man, if all these companies in Silicon Valley can be so focused on the customer and serving them, especially early on, as part of like their recipe for success, and you know, how much more that we already have these principles as part of our teaching and faith. For serving, you know, an individual, how much more should we be doing it? In the Catholic space, right? And
yes,
so you know, it may actually be early on that if it's more helpful for your success if you're able to genuinely love and serve the customer or the client or the investor, actually.
Yes, love your investor. That's up there with love your enemy. Yes.
Yeah, and
yes.
yeah. I think that was our Lord said that at one point.
That's right. Love your VC. I think our Lord said.
Yeah, VC. That's the new American Bible.
Yes, exactly. I think that was the Morgan Stanley 316. So,
all right. So here's a couple questions in here. So, okay, so Michael from Strong Catholic Dad asks, how do you translate practically the 4 pillars of CST into parenting, into building the society of your family, and developing their personalities and souls?
Yeah, I pretty much issue a quiz every morning. I'm kidding. So, yeah, no multiple choice on my end, man. Everybody's got to do it by rote. So no, so we've got it. To me, I think taking every single opportunity, every single example, you know, and now because we see our kids more than we ever thought we would, right now, right? Every one of us has probably spent more time with our kids than we ever did with our parents. But you know, the lemonade stand thing is an extremely important part. It's like, how do you fairly price something? You know, how do you actually know that that's the right price? How do you know where, you know, okay, so are you going to do this? Are you considering COVID-19 conditions? Are you going to put, you know, just little basic things out there? Hand sanitizer, you're going to put a mask out there, you know, these different types of things, because what we're trying to, again, encourage is a service mentality. The mentality that it's not about you just making a buck, you know, off of mom and dad's lemonade. It's about how are you serving your customer? You know, the book report that gets done, the book report and how it gets done. You know, are you respecting my time? Is this really the best level of, you know, of course, subsidiarity is probably too hard to say, but is this, you know, is this something you can do yourself? You know, can't you do this? You know, when is the right time to come in? And then let's think about the common good of our family. You know, what is our family? What are the ways that our family actually has its own common good? And then what are the ways that our family then contributes to the common good? I mean, we have in our own vernacular, we talk about that all the time. And we also talk about, again, boy, do we talk about this. It's that applying your talents to work. Don't do shoddy work, you know, do your work well, and then make sure that you're actually, you know, you're able to stand by this. So, you know, again, these principles become very, very real they're living. They're right in your face every day. To the point where my son puts "work hard, daddy." Yes, this is what I get.
Great. Thank you. Good question. Thoughtful answer. So Martin Ford has a question. So he says he read an article in the Atlantic like about 10 years ago called "The End of Work." He says, "Are you concerned at all about the possibility of a future with much less or even no work?"
Yeah, I see. I am only in the context of Marxism, I suppose, and I don't mean that tongue in cheek. I really do believe that if our biggest concern right now is not understanding that the dignity of work and the connection thereof. I think that there can be a confusion of, what is work and then how work is done, right? I mean, those are things that we're wrestling with right now. Kind of back to the whole point of essential versus non-essential. I think that just because we move, quite frankly, I love this whole virtual thing. I'm like, I'm totally good with it. I mean, all my team is all over the place. I mean, we've been virtual forever. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily bother me in that respect. But what does bother me is, thinking that there's an automatic displacement of work, that just because you're virtual, there could be a displacement, and that there could be a devaluing of work. In fact, as I was thinking about this morning, I was thinking about, why is it that people that win the lottery, right? How they always they're always unhappy. They never have that, the money. Well, because they're not able to apply their talents to that money that is earned, and there's not that connection. And then we kind of think about, well, why are public housing, why is public housing always the worst? These types of things. You go back to the fact that you don't have that connection of application of talent to work, to the earning, to the choice, right? You have a choice to be able to do certain types of things. And if we think about freedom in the context of freedom to do the right thing, right? We have freedom to do the right thing. If we take that freedom to do the right thing away, and we have freedom only to respond to a system, well, then of course that devalues work. So that's why I'm thinking, it's like that. That's why I mean, it's like, to me, our biggest challenge right now is not so much virtual, non-virtual, these types of things. It's where do we put the center of the person? Is it the dignity, and we have to understand that connection vis-a-vis work.
Yeah, great. Well, good. Well, this is, I think we'll try and wrap it up, try and end on time, but we just want to say, Laurance, thank you so much for taking time to be with us, share this, prepare this conversation and share these insights. It's just such an important issue, the intersection of Catholic social teaching and entrepreneurship and business, so that we're like being integrated as we approach this. So
yeah,
really,
absolutely. And I just saw somebody who wants to take the full class. Just so you know, the average for my first assignments for all my class has been no greater than 8% out of 100. So just know what you're signing up for, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
No,
what's the curve though at the end of the day?
Yeah, right, exactly. That's right. No, everybody gets a trophy.
Everyone gets a trophy, so it's fine.
That's right.
This has been great. Thank you. It's been a lot of fun too.
All right, guys. Best of luck. I look forward to connecting with all of y'all too.